honorary professor at the School of Communications from the University of Texas in Austin. An expert, as we already know, on silent cinema and the earliest days of cinema, especially Frances Ford. She's also written on, for instance, the role of movie theaters in American communities. And as well, her recent books have been devoted to Jack Benny's lost radio show transcripts. So check for those. And we're really delighted to have Kathryn here with us to share her expertise on Frances Ford.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. That's so kind. Well, I hope you like the collected her. Did you see a little bit of John Ford in that? The multiple planes of action, the Indians getting one on the couch, on the cavalry. I like Anne Little played the brave young woman who was willing to put on a soldier's uniform to go save her lover Bob Evans there. So as I said, these one, two, and three reel westerns released in 1912 really took the film world by storm. They were just such a bigger scale of action and really terrific direction and just really very well put together. They were Thomas Ince unfortunately wanted to take all the credit for these films, even though he was executive producer, and he didn't really. And not only did Frances Ford direct this one, he directed and starred most of the great films that year. And by November 1912, he ends up getting into a fist fight with Thomas Ince about who should be getting all the credit for these films, and he up and leaves for the Universal Studio. He takes with him his best friend by this point was a young actress named Grace Cunard, who had joined the Ince Company in about August of that year. At Universal, they become the most popular team of filmmakers. They make mysteries and detective stories and westerns. In the spring of 1914, the two make the first serial, cliffhanger serial from Universal. It came out within 1 month of The Perils of Pauline and The $1 Million Mystery and some of the other big important serials that year that made tons of money. They were like the Netflix streaming of 1914. They weren't just for Saturday morning children, but they made huge amounts of money for the studios as well as for Frances Ford, who was the director, and he also cut his own films and titled them. He was the lead performer, and Grace wrote the scenarios, and she was the lead female performer. They did a series of 15-week serials where she is either a jewel thief and he's a rival jewel thief, or she's got a secret. This is like a Hitchcock film. She's got the widget somewhere, and he wants to steal the widget for her, and they steal it back and forth from each other all across Eastern Europe, or all across the Pacific, or across a circus, or what. So these films, these serial film series made them household names, and very famous and very rich. But unfortunately, all good things come to an end. Grace Cunard got injured too often in making these serials, and she abruptly retired at the beginning of 1917. Frances Ford had brought John Ford out, Jack Feeney, who had basically asked, hey, can I come have an internship with you, big brother, who I hardly know, and come out in the summer of 1914 briefly, then again by November 1914. I can talk later and tomorrow about how Jack Ford learned everything indeed about filmmaking from working for 3 years with Frances Ford. He played small parts. He did stunts. Everybody turned the crank of the camera. So he was fully involved. The company worked 18 to 20 hours a day. They loved to work, and they just made movie after movie after movie after movie. But as I said, in early 1917, Grace left him. Grace left Frances, and Jack Ford decided to go off on his own and start making westerns with Harry Carey. Frances Ford was very frustrated. He didn't like the way the Hollywood studios were coming together. He didn't want to be told what to direct. He wanted to direct only films that he had written and that he would star in. And so, with all this money he made from the serials, he decides to go independent. And he literally puts most of his money into building a brick and mortar studio on the 6,000 block of Sunset Boulevard. The exterior walls are still there today. It's in the middle of what used to be Poverty Row, but it was the Ford Art Film Studio. And he decides he wants to keep making cliffhanger serials, but he also wants to make some like 60-minute features, because features are just becoming a thing. And so that leads to The Craving. The Craving has been such a mystery because I couldn't find material in the trade journals about him shooting it. It turns out this was a pet project that he worked on in between doing other things. He had started it when he was still with Grace, and it was called Dante's Inferno. And then when he gets back with a former wife, Elsie, they work on it again, and it's called Madame Delirium. Well, they release it in the fall. He releases it in the fall of 1918 as Delirium, or Madame Delirium, and he has the bad luck that it hits right as the influenza epidemic shut all movie theaters and all manufacturing facilities. So imagine the writer's strike and actor's strike as well as COVID all happening at the same time. Francis had very bad luck with this. So he took it back from distribution, but in January 1919, Universal Studios, who he'd broken off with, they come back to him and they go, hey, have you produced any films? We're really short of films for release, and we'd really like to buy your film from you. So Universal bought this independently produced feature. They retitled, they edited a little bit, they censored it a little bit, they named it The Craving. It is an odd film. Okay, it's a combination. It draws from some of the mystery and early horror of Jekyll and Hyde. So Francis Ford is gonna play a chemist making explosives. And there's gonna be a rival chemist who wants to steal the formula. And the rival chemist comes from India, and he knows mind control. So we've got mind control, we've got rival scientists, we've got explosives, we've got a lovely girl who is in the power of the Indian scientist. It's an excuse for Francis Ford to do all kinds of things in this film. He brings in some extra footage from, he'd made an epic in early 1915 about the Sepoy Rebellion in India. And it was called The Campbells Are Coming. And it was 15 reels. It would have outrivaled Birth of a Nation. And Carl Lumley said, no, I will not allow you to, we hate features here at Universal. And he made Francis cut it up into 3 or 4 little films. Francis apparently kept some of the footage, and he used it. So we'll see some extant footage, and that's where you'll see Grace Kinnard make a very brief appearance as the nanny of the little daughter. Who so look for nanny, little daughter. Okay, Francis was also experimenting with special effects, all during his time at Universal. He and Grace loved to make double and triple and quadruple exposures. And it would, of themselves, and it was usually playing characters with split personalities, twins and triplets. Some of whom are good and some of whom are bad, and sometimes they'll start fighting with each other. You'll see that Francis was very proud of his experiments of using these double and triple exposures. In the case of The Craving, it's because Ford, the character, Carol Wales, describes he used to have a terrible drinking problem. And once in his cups, he sees these little sprites, kind of like Tinkerbell, come pouring out of a champagne bottle. And you're gonna see them grab, 4 or 5 of them grab a giant pencil, and they're gonna write on a bar napkin, if you don't stop drinking, you'll perish. Look for that. We had to remake these titles. So you're gonna see all kinds of, and then another thing, and kind of like a Ghost of Christmas Past Ebenezer Scrooge thing, when the scientist is back in his cups again, he's lost the battle with the scientist, and he's raving drunk. His better nature, his rational mind pops out in a shadowy form next to him and says, I'm going to scare the hell out of you and get you to quit your alcoholism. So he takes him to the battlefields of Europe. The U.S. is still in the war. I think this is pretty extraordinary as a way of saying that war is insane. This is showing you what the evil things men can do should make you go into your right brain and quit drinking. Well, you'll see. It kind of happens. So, a strange film. It was actually co-directed by John Ford, was called in as an assistant and gets a screen credit for this. It was, like 99% of all of Francis Ford's films, it was lost. But by a miracle, the wonderful Eye Museum, the Dutch Film Archive, found a copy of it. They had a collection, the Desmet collection. Exhibitor, a distributor in Holland would get American films, like a lot of Universals and Vitagraphs, take them, cut out the English titles, retitle them in Dutch, and show them around the country. By a matter of miracles, that man, Mr. Desmet, managed to save a bunch of his reels. And because Universal had agreed to release this film, it was in his collection. So it came to us by hook or crook. Beware, it's kind of strange, but mysterious. And I think it really paves the way. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari would come out in just 2 years hence. And what we think of as real horror film would start. But I see some roots of it, American roots of it, in the kind of mystery and weirdness. That's what I wanted to say about The Craving. I hope that we can watch it because it's 58 minutes, and then I'll be available afterward if you have any questions. But this is the actual premiere. I've never seen it on a big screen before, so I hope you find it interesting. The Craving.
They have a long career at RKO, but they never worked together again as far as I know. Maybe
I found it in the trade directories for 1918 and 1919 that my Donna was working for. Ford was very loyal to people he kept up socially with people he'd known with working with Gaston Méliès in 1910 and 1911. Scenery painter and things like that. So I appreciate that John Ford's longtime stock company has, its predecessor, and Francis Ford's longtime work with.
Was Francis Ford's experience with alcohol similar to John's? And also, how do you interpret this self-acknowledgement of the problem with alcohol from Francis Ford?
Exactly. I'm still working my way through it. I think, I don't know. I don't know the personal. Francis Ford kept a whole lot more private. I know he did have long-term problems of getting drunk every so often. I've never heard a story that he was ever mean. So I think it made him melancholy. So there's a couple statements in his unpublished autobiography about sort of sitting at a bar with a drink and sort of ruminating over old times. I mean,
There's a film about a guy with a problem.
yes, well, it could have been drugs. So, I think he wanted to use alcohol here as a symbol of lots of things, people were really getting out of control, and indeed it was his demon for a long time. But I don't have as much, his life is in no way as well documented as John Ford's, for better or for worse. So yes, I know it's a problem, but no, I don't have the many hard details. Kevin?
I had two questions. For those of us who really don't understand the process, if you could explain how Francis or anyone going back to the Mondays or did the wonderful scenes with the people and the doubling. And then also, another important one went out to Hollywood in the early days was Tyler Abrams, who got involved with producing. I didn't know if you would come across that name. He came out to Hollywood around the same time.
Didn't he help form a company that made the government, that made the Birth of the Nation? That
I think so, but I don't know.
Yes.
I didn't know if you would come across the name. But the technology.
The technology, just like Buster, I always, in my classes, I love to show Buster Keaton in Sherlock Jr. or the Playhouse of doing these multiple exposures, and you literally had to do it in the camera. Back in the day, it had been known since the late 1890s, but literally you had to keep, so the cameraman had to keep account of how many frames of film had been exposed. And you had literally a black screen, and you did what you did on the side of the screen, and then cranked the camera back a certain number of frames, and you literally used a piece of masking tape on the front of the camera lens. And so you literally exposed half the film, covered it up, rolled the camera back, and exposed the other half of the film. So he was able to do that. Again, he didn't leave me the secrets behind. But this would be double exposure. Perhaps the camera then was, it was a black frame, something taped off on the camera lens, but then the camera at a far distance to be able to make those people little. So it's both complicated and uncomplicated, and someone who knows the technology would tell me how to do it. It's kind of magic. But as I said, but it was not new technology. And so these were the, I found in the trade papers, Francis Ford was all about talking about these special effects and how hard he had worked on them. And indeed, he instructed Universal to sell the film, or market the film on the special effects here. So I think it was both the small size characters, but also sort of being involved with them. Not that they were happening at the same time, that he was Francis Ford was interacting with those little sprites. That's what he thought was new. So, yeah.
One more.
Sure.
When you see straight shooting, and it seems that John Ford evolved post-Griffith to something more sophisticated and all this kind of stuff. Did Francis Ford, in his films, ever modulate into something more modern, more sophisticated in terms of cameras and shots and stuff like that?
Unfortunately, we just don't have the material. Francis Ford, bad luck hit him right after this film. He had a crooked, so he sunk all his money into this brick and mortar studio that I mentioned, the Ford Art Studio, and he was determined to stay away from the studio's power and to release his films through a states' rights. Well, the states' rights market was collapsing at that time. Here, the big studios, Warner's and MGM, Lowe's and Paramount and Fox, were buying up chains of theaters and controlling the distribution. And they would make ironclad contracts that it took the Justice Department and the Paramount decree to stop. The studios would say, you must rent 52 films from us a year, and you must only rent our films. We'll cancel your contract if you buy other films. And so rapidly, independent filmmakers in the US who were trying to release their films found they had no way to release them. So Ford had put all his money into the studio and making 4 or 5 films, and then couldn't release them. Couldn't find a market for them. So by 1923, so this is about 3 years later, the studio is in bankruptcy and he's broke. So he loses everything. And what he did, so he didn't get a chance to develop more sophisticated things, like, he didn't have that 10 years that John Ford did doing jobs of work for hire. What I understand Francis Ford did to get through the rest of the 20s, starting in about 1924, he formed a group of like 6 friends, and they targeted the cheap, by this point, cheap Saturday morning cereal market. And they set themselves a budget of $6,000 to make 15 weeks of so 30 reels of film. $6,000. And they would, stop actual trains on the street and, and light something on fire and get the fire department to come and put it out so they could shoot it. They were doing all kinds of pirate filmmaking. But when they could sell these films, and there was a good market for them to sell them to Poverty Row Studios, they could make $60,000. And they split it equally 6 ways. And he said, so, that's really kind of, indie, kind of small-time filmmaking. But he said it was enough. It was adequate. It gave him something to do in the 20s. He mentions, and I haven't found out the information yet, he was in a serious accident while on a Fox film about 1928, that he tried to sue Fox, claiming that the injury, untreated, meant that he could not direct in silent films, that he could only be a bit part player. I don't know the truth of that, but he never directed a film in sound because it was so much more complicated and you needed a bigger studio. So he switched to being a character role actor permanently by about the counting of sound. And we know that he was in about 30 John Ford films, many times not credited. So, Kevin,
Is your speculation, Kathy, that might have affected his memory and with lines and so forth, that injury?
No.
No?
I think it was more physical getting around.
Oh.
I'm not sure I ever saw him ride, but, he went fishing, so I don't know if that's the truth. It's something I found in the trade journals, that it made the trades, it made Variety, that he tried to sue Fox for a couple, so I'm still learning, so.
You don't want to call on me because mine is a 5-minute warning.
Oh, okay, well, indeed, we've got, it's a,
We do have 2 hours for you guys to all talk some more.
Hooray!
And then you want to, but the museum is.
oh, well, I know the museum is going to close. But I said, thank you for sticking it out so long tonight. Thank you for watching The Craving. I haven't made up my mind, if it's any good yet, but as I said, it really intrigues me, the roots it shares with horror films. Francis Ford loved to call his serials mystery serials, and it involves caked, masked people kidnapping folks and doing nefarious deeds. Well, it's not quite the monsters of that would be Universal films in the 30s, coming from German monster films. But there's something, that's kind of as weird as Caligari going on. But between that and the good old-fashioned American, Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. And so I'll appreciate your comments in the future on it. So thank you very much.